The price of bread is up by about 16% more than this time last year. The price of milk, 17%. And the price of eggs, nearly 40%.
Do you think that in America? A country spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year on technology and defense. There are still people who have to take a bus for over an hour just to buy a loaf of bread? Or an elderly woman in Chicago forced to choose between having eggs for breakfast or paying for her blood pressure medication next week? It sounds absurd, but this is the reality unfolding in many major cities across the United States. Tariffs, inflation, natural disasters, all hitting at once as if to crush the very faith of the American people. Food prices are soaring, but the bigger problem, options are vanishing. Grocery stores are closing. Fresh produce is disappearing. Seniors, working families, people who've paid taxes their entire lives now have to fight for a single carton of eggs. In this video, we'll take you through 10 cities sliding into a severe food crisis. Places where every meal has become a stressful calculation. And you'll understand why more and more Americans feel abandoned. Honolulu, Hawaii. For many, Honolulu is a dream vacation spot. Warm sun, blue seas, and the scent of plumeria in the air. But for those who live here, reality is becoming suffocating. Not because of the heat, but because of empty grocery shelves and food bills climbing higher by the day. Can you imagine this a carton of eggs costing nearly $9? A gallon of milk that takes an hour of standing in line to get? And fresh meat. It's a luxury. 1.5 times the price on the mainland if you're lucky enough to even find it. All of it boils down to one reason Honolulu cannot feed itself. Nearly all of its food must come in by ship from the mainland. One small disruption, bad weather, a closed port, throws everything into chaos. And that disruption just happened. Tsunami waves triggered by an offshore earthquake have already hit Hawaii. And if they've damaged shipping lanes, this city is essentially cut off from its food supply. In neighborhoods far from the center, like Kalihi or Iwa Beach, people aren't thinking about food choices anymore, they just hope to buy something to put on the table. Frozen meat, canned vegetables, old rice. The real disaster isn't just the shortage of food, it's the feeling of helplessness. You know what you need, it used to be cheap, easy to get, and now it's gone. That's the reality for Americans living in what looks like paradise, but struggling every day as if they were trapped. And the most dangerous part, no one on the mainland truly understands this fear. They think Hawaii is a resort. They don't imagine locals standing in long lines just to buy a single bunch of greens. They don't realize that if a Category 3 hurricane hits next week, the entire island could lose supplies for a week. If you live in Hawaii, don't wait for the TV to flash emergency. Start with the basics: cooking oil, dry noodles, boxed milk, frozen meat. Stock enough for at least 10 days. Because here no one knows what will happen next week. But everyone feels that something bad is getting very close. Los Angeles, California nowhere shows the divide between rich and poor in grocery shopping, quite like Los Angeles right now. On the west side of the city, Beverly Hills, Santa Monica, supermarkets are still overflowing with imported goods. Prices are sky high, but there are still buyers. Yet drive just 20 minutes south into neighborhoods like South Central Boyle Heights or Watts, and you'll see another world: entirely small stores, shuttered food trucks no longer stopping by, and produce shelves stripped bare by 9 a.m. People here aren't afraid of higher prices, they're used to that. What they fear is there's simply nothing left to buy. Los Angeles' logistics system was once its pride. The Port of Long Beach is the largest shipping gateway in America. But now, with clogged container traffic, a shortage of drivers, rising fuel costs, and supply chains prioritizing deliveries to wealthier areas, low-income neighborhoods are slowly being cut off. Chicken that once sold for $2.50 a pound now runs close to $6. Frozen fruit milk pasta. Not just more expensive, but rationed. A few stores have even taped up signs, "Limit 2 per customer." What's leaving people most adrift, though, is that major grocery chains are pulling out of poor neighborhoods. In just 2 years, over a dozen Ralph's, Vons, and Sprouts stores in East LA and South Central have closed, citing lack of profitability, leaving residents to travel 3 to 5 miles just to buy basic food. Picture this: a 68-year-old woman living alone in Florence, Graham, no car, riding the bus for 40 minutes just to buy a loaf of bread, then carrying the heavy bags back home. No choices, no discounts, and no one speaking up for her. Los Angeles is no longer the city of angels. For many working-class residents, it's become the city of waiting and hoping. Waiting to see if the grocery store has stock today, hoping prices won't rise again. If you live in LA and haven't seen this shift, go visit a supermarket in a working-class neighborhood late in the day. You'll see shelves wiped clean, people standing still in front of empty coolers in their eyes. Not angry anymore, just hollow, drained of trust. And when trust in having a full meal disappears, the real crisis has already begun. Minneapolis, Minnesota. In Minneapolis, the food crisis didn't hit like a storm. It crept in slowly, day by day. And then one day, people realized putting together a meal wasn't as easy as it used to be. Unlike coastal cities, Minneapolis doesn't face tsunamis or port shutdowns. Instead, it's bearing the weight of back-to-back brutal winters, compounded by the quiet withdrawal of major distributors. Imagine a January day 20 below zero driving through snow just to find a gallon of milk or a bag of potatoes. But worse than the cold is arriving to see shelves holding only expired goods, bruised vegetables, and meat priced twice what it cost last month. And no one in the store has an answer. Minneapolis once had a stable local food network, farms in Wisconsin, packing plants in Iowa. But in just 3 years, more than 40% of those have shut down or pivoted to exports. The reasons are obvious: the cost of cold storage, the cost of fuel, and no real state-level support. Well, middle-class families still have options. They can shop online, order from big suburban supermarkets. But for those living in North Minneapolis or in African American and immigrant communities, they're sliding into what's become a true food desert in the middle of this frozen city. Schools are reporting a rising number of students showing up without breakfast. Food banks are overwhelmed, and even churches, once the safety net for struggling families, have begun turning away new requests for help. Do you know what's scarier than hunger? The feeling that no one hears you anymore. No politician mentions North Minneapolis in their debates. No company wants to open stores in neighborhoods that don't turn a profit. For people here, the crisis isn't about missing a meal one day. It's the exhaustion of choice. A life shrinking down to overpriced basics or simply nothing at all. Minneapolis is slowly becoming a new symbol of a bitter irony. A city surrounded by some of the richest farmland in America, yet fighting every day just to keep a balanced meal on the table. And if this trend continues by next winter, people here won't just be battling the ice and snow, they'll be fighting the crushing weight of being forgotten by the system itself. San Diego, California. Sunny skies, blue waters, and colorful farmers markets. That's the postcard image of San Diego. But beneath that polished surface, a food crisis is spreading, like an oil slick on hot sand. San Diego's problem isn't a lack of goods. The problem is the lack of fairness in how they're distributed and priced. Those living in neighborhoods like La Jolla or Del Mar can still pick fresh salmon, everyday drink, organic almond milk, and get hand-selected produce delivered to their doorstep. But head east, into communities of Mexican-American families, immigrants and low-wage workers crammed into places like City Heights or Logan Heights, and you'll see a very different reality. The supermarkets there haven't closed, but many shelves are perpetually understocked. Not because of international supply issues, but because retailers prioritize shipping goods to neighborhoods with higher profits. That leaves lower-income areas waiting longer or receiving items already close to expiration. A box of kids' cereal, once the go-to breakfast, now costs 1.5 times more. Eggs, an essential, are often limited per customer. And the worst hit: fresh milk. Larger families are being forced to switch to cheap powdered milk, which has little nutritional value. San Diego is also a border city, and that creates a strange twist. Some residents with relatives in Tijuana are returning to an old habit, crossing the border to buy cheaper groceries in Mexico, then bringing them back. Something that only happened during the financial crisis is happening again, right in the heart of America. Local officials say they're monitoring the situation, but people can't eat monitoring. They need solutions. They need price relief. They need to be treated like citizens, not as afterthoughts, in their own city. And here's something you won't hear much about in the news. Some schools in low-income parts of the city have started cutting back student lunch portions because their food budgets can't keep up with the new prices. If that isn't a sign of crisis, what is San Diego? The city of ocean breezes and rolling waves is now facing another kind of tide, a tide of soaring prices, shrinking choices, and residents scraping together each meal as if they're living on borrowed time in a life they once believed was secure. New York. New York has never been a cheap place to live. But few imagined that even middle-class neighborhoods in Brooklyn, Queens, or Buffalo would start talking about skipping meals because of food prices. Here, the crisis isn't about empty shelves. The supermarkets are still lit, the aisles still stocked. What's infuriating people is the pace of price hikes that feels uncontrollable, and the sense of being manipulated by forces they can't see. In just 6 months, beef prices have jumped more than 40%. A bag of spinach that once cost under $3 now hits $6. Milk, eggs, pasta, they creep up week after week, dollar by dollar, until people stop even looking at price tags. They just grab the cheapest, smallest thing and walk away quickly. New Yorkers aren't strangers to instability, but this crisis isn't like a pandemic or a hurricane. There's no clear starting point, no obvious end in sight. And that's what's breeding a quiet anxiety, especially among seniors living on pensions and social security checks. In northern suburbs like Yonkers or farther out in Syracuse, many small shops have started demanding cash because credit card fees eat up too much of their already thin margins. And when elderly shoppers show up with EBT cards, they're turned away left to walk home empty-handed. New York City was once the center of the world, but right now in the Bronx or Harlem, people are lining up in front of free food trucks just to get a few potatoes, some rice, and a dented can set to expire this month. No one thought this could happen in the world's biggest economy, but it's happening, quietly, relentlessly. The food is still there, but faith in the system is drying up. When you ask for help and no one answers. When you spend $100 and can't buy 3 decent meals. When you look around and see everyone in survival mode. The crisis stops being a macro issue and becomes something you feel at your own dinner table. New York won't fall easily, but if nothing changes, this city could soon become a place where only the wealthy eat well. And everyone else is left to choose between cutting back or giving up. Chicago, Illinois. From a map. Chicago looks like it has everything a major city needs to withstand a food crisis, a port railroads, distribution hubs, massive cold storage. But the reality on the ground is very different. Residents are facing soaring grocery prices and fewer choices by the day. Over the past 3 months, regional supermarket chains like Jewel, Osco, Aldi, and Save a Lot in Southside neighborhoods have quietly changed what's on their shelves, cutting back on fresh meat and produce and stocking more processed industrial packaged goods. A local report found that more than 40% of stores in areas like Austin and Inglewood have drastically reduced supplies of eggs, milk, potatoes, and beef as fuel cold storage and import costs skyrocket. Some stores have even posted signs, "We can't guarantee enough stock for every customer today." Not because the food isn't out there, but because the city's own distribution network is snarled by rising fuel prices, refrigerated storage costs, and disruptions from Canadian imports. Issues that feel far away, but land right in the laps of Chicago shoppers. And the divide isn't between states, it's within Chicago itself. In River North or Lincoln Park, stores are still full of fresh produce, even if prices sting. But in West Garfield Park or South Shore, where average incomes sit below the national level, produce sections are left with wilted greens and onions and dry husks. This growing food gap is measurable. A Chicago Food Equity report shows that in the first half of 2025, the number of households traveling more than 2 miles just to buy fresh food jumped 28%. A third of those households don't have a car. With canned meat, whole milk, and cooking oil all up more than 20%, compared to last year, people aren't shopping for what's good anymore. They're shopping for what's there, what lasts, what can stretch across multiple meals, what's least likely to run out. No one is shouting about it, but no one is okay with it either. A heavy silence has settled over Chicago's working-class neighborhoods, places where food used to be the simplest thing. Now it's an equation, a calculation of miles, dollars, and the faint hope something will be on the shelf. Washington. The U.S. Capitol has gleaming supermarkets, upscale grocery stores, and fine dining restaurants. If you live in Capitol Hill, Georgetown, or DuPont Circle, but cross the river into Ward 7 or Ward 8, home to most of the city's working-class, low-income residents. And you'll see what public health groups call a true food desert. Data from DC Greens shows that in 2025, more than 52% of households east of the Anacostia River rely on convenience stores. Places where food is expensive, low in nutrition, and where choices barely exist. At the same time, the only 3 supermarkets serving more than 160,000 residents in that area have cut back on imports from Canada, especially salmon cheese and frozen potatoes, because tariffs and shipping costs keep climbing. Unlike older industrial cities, Washington doesn't have a strong local farm-to-city supply network. Most goods come in through long, multi-day distribution routes from Pennsylvania, New York, or even Canada. Every shock to logistics or import tariffs gets stacked onto the final price on the shelf. At some stores in Northeast DC, a gallon of whole milk now sells for $6.49, nearly 30% higher than at the start of the year. Frozen foods, once the budget fallback, are now rationed. And for families using SNAP or local assistance programs, every trip to the store feels less like picking dinner and more like sitting down for a stressful math test. The irony is sharp. In the very city where national policies are written, people feel abandoned by those same policies. They're not asking for free meals, just stable prices and stocked shelves like the neighborhoods across town. But until that happens, Washington remains a city with two parallel realities. One of congressional banquets piled high with beef wine and fresh imported fruit. And just a few miles away, people lining up at dawn for a bag of aid groceries meant to stretch only 3 days. And between those two worlds, the divide isn't just geography, it's an imbalance that grows meal by meal. Tampa, Florida. From a logistics standpoint, Tampa used to be one of Florida's bright spots. With its international port cross-state highways and proximity to major food processing hubs, the city seemed naturally equipped to weather any supply chain crisis. But by mid-2025, those advantages started to show their limits. Tampa doesn't lack roads, it lacks a stable flow of goods. And that has pushed food prices in the city's central and western districts higher than anyone expected. The issue isn't the port or the workforce. The problem is that major suppliers are prioritizing shipments to easier markets like Miami, Orlando, or Jacksonville, places with denser populations, higher spending power, and better profit margins. That's left mid-tier stores in Tampa, the ones serving local working-class communities, stranded in shortage. According to data from the Florida Food Service Association, prices for frozen meat, canned fish, and cooking oil in Tampa have jumped an average of 19% in just 60 days. Items like cheese, whole milk, and frozen vegetables are now rationed per customer. And it's not just about prices. The choices are shrinking too. A local supermarket chain in West Shore recently had to swap out all 12 of its frozen meal lines after losing its suppliers who could meet price points. Residents there now describe the situation as Whole Foods prices with bargain basement quality. Tensions are rising further as bad weather drives interstate shipping costs even higher. Tampa has been hit by 3 tropical depressions in just the past 4 months, halting supply routes and overloading cold storage facilities. Meanwhile, lower-income neighborhoods like Sulphur Springs, East Tampa, and the Cuban and Puerto Rican communities on the city's south side are slowly turning into distribution gray zones, not lucrative enough to be prioritized and without the resources to fill the gap themselves. People in Tampa aren't waiting for handouts, but they are running out of options. And if this trend holds into September's hurricane season, when stockpiling surges, the price of a bag of potatoes or a bottle of cooking oil won't just be a matter of a few dollars. It will be the line between a full meal and a meal that's just about getting by. Phoenix, Arizona. When summer temperatures hover above 100 degrees, anything that needs refrigeration automatically costs about 50% more. And that's exactly what's driving food prices in Phoenix up faster than in most other cities. In stores like Fry's Safeway and Bosch's Shoppers are starting to notice the shift, not just in price but in product size. Meat packs are smaller, cheese comes in lighter portions, fruit juice is being swapped for watered-down blends. No one has made an official announcement, but it's clear the supply chain is quietly cutting corners, in both quantity and quality, just to keep prices looking reasonable for customers. The hardest hit items: milk, butter, frozen meats, and frozen vegetables, all of which require strict cold storage from production to shelf. And as import tariffs start hitting key ingredients packaging, and refrigeration costs will spike, especially for products coming from Canada. The concern isn't only rising prices, it's access. Some neighborhoods in West Phoenix and Maryvale have begun reporting localized outages on weekends, meaning items like eggs, chicken, or salmon sell out in the first few hours of the day and aren't restocked. People here aren't far from grocery stores, but in a sprawling city with limited public transit, a 5 to 6 mile trip can be enough to make an elderly resident or a carless family skip meals. And with the city's population surging, particularly with newcomers from California and Nevada, Phoenix now has too many people needing food and not enough affordable supply to go around. That's why even a major store can look stripped bare by Sunday afternoon. In Chicago or DC, food has become expensive because of policy. In Phoenix, it's the heat and the cost of keeping things cold that are draining wallets. And in a summer harsher than usual, the question isn't just will prices go up, It's will there even be anything left to buy right now in Phoenix? The heat isn't just coming from the sun. It's coming from every grocery bill you face on the way out of the store. Atlanta, Georgia. Unlike coastal cities or disaster-prone regions, Atlanta has long been seen as the calm center of the Southeast, a place with few hurricanes, good roads, and a manageable population. But that's only on paper. In reality, over the past few months, food prices in Atlanta have been climbing like clockwork. Steady quiet without dramatic spikes, but with no end in sight. And for many people here, the problem isn't empty shelves. It's walking out of the store with lighter bags and a longer receipt every single time. Kroger, Walmart, and Publix, the three biggest grocery chains in Atlanta, have openly raised prices on more than 200 essential items just this past quarter. The steepest hikes hit frozen foods, canned milk breakfast cereals, and spreads, the staples working families buy every week. Atlanta might not be the main destination for Canadian imports, but most of the city's food distribution centers rely on supplies shipped down from the north, especially dairy and cereals from the Midwest and Northeast. When tariffs drive up costs for those suppliers, Atlanta gets caught in the crossfire. The result, stores are quietly cutting options. Budget brands are vanishing. What's left are premium products, and few are happy paying for them. A box of kids' cereal that used to cost $3.49 now sells for $5.29. A standard carton of whole milk that was $4.99 is now $6.49. And in poorer neighborhoods across South Atlanta, these basics are often sold out by the end of the day. Even some food assistance nonprofits in areas like West End and Vine City have paused distributions because they can't secure bulk purchase contracts anymore. The people of Atlanta haven't raised their voices yet. They're quietly cutting portions, switching to cheaper substitutes, skipping a few familiar items. But if prices keep rising, and especially if Canadian goods are squeezed further, even patience has its breaking point. Atlanta hasn't hit panic mode, but every grocery trip now feels like a mental stress test, counting every dollar, crossing off things that used to be normal. And in a city once considered the most stable in the South, that's the real warning sign. That crises don't always crash in, sometimes they creep. Shortages, soaring, prices, fewer choices. This isn't just the story of far-off nations. It's happening in the very cities once thought to be America's safest bets. And the scariest part isn't how fast it's happening. It's the silence. No big alerts, no sirens, just a little more missing from the shelf each week, or the same old items suddenly costing twice as much.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.